So
No, I understand completely. And we're recording right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you first. So
okay.
if people can't tell from your voice, we are here with the great Uberboyo, a prolific content
Whoa.
creator. And for people who don't know, you can find him at uberboyo.com. He is on Twitter. He is on Instagram. He is on YouTube at Uberboyo. He's also on Odyssey as well. Those are the best places to find him. He's always uploading content. So if you like what you hear on this interview, go straight over there. And Uberboyo, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Not at all, my man. Thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, I guess take the lead there and we'll dive in.
Now, there's a lot we could talk about, and I have a few key points based on some of your videos that I'm a great admirer of. And your two areas of focus, and correct me if I'm wrong here, would be Friedrich Nietzsche and Carl Jung. Was that correct, or am I way off?
No, that's absolutely correct, but I guess it's not the full picture because this is more just algorithm dominant. Like I would talk about a lot of things, and then when something takes on, I begin to drill down in it. So Jung took off first, actually, and then Nietzsche took off recently, and so I've been talking about an awful lot of Nietzsche recently. But and I do absolutely love these dudes, and I think their perspectives on the world are very, very helpful for and sort of grounding for many of the things I'm trying to assert. But generally speaking, I'm very much interested in. I guess maybe the best way to go into it would be to go into my story. I'll try to present it this way. But I was in college when I was younger, like we all do. I ended up in the education system, and I was getting taught. I did literate arts, like liberal arts, and I was doing literature and music and all this stuff. And I was getting educated about by Karl Marx, critical theory, Derrida, stuff like this. And there was an awful lot of like very heady academies going on with this. Lots of like really overly complicated academic language, talking about the Western canon as this evil thing, this phallogocentric thing that we must destroy. And none of these things we must critique and learn to understand why it's wrong and why it's fascist and all these type of things. And I didn't understand any of this stuff back then. I didn't understand any of the conceptualizations. I wasn't like launching any intellectual challenge against this. But I really didn't like what was happening because there's something intuitive in me that was telling me that this is not good. This is not a good vibe because they're here bitching about the Western canon. And I remember I chose literature in college because I wanted to write great books and create great art and do these type of things. I want to participate in the project of creating great culture. I always loved Shakespeare and I was very good at writing and I was very good at speech and all this when I was younger. I just have that type of mind, And so I got into the education system because I actually wanted to go in and get trained, like the way you think of a UFC fighter would go into a gym and he'd get shaped into a beast, And the more I've thought about this, the more I'm like, Jesus, man, like the simple way I was thinking was actually so accurate. Like that's what education should be. The education should be about manifesting your potential. And I was like quite a sensitive young man with like a lot of potential, and like if someone just caught me at that age and cultivated me, could have turned me into an absolute beast. And if I was born maybe in the 19th century and got under the mentorship of like a competent poet or I don't know, musician or something, God knows what could have happened to me. But I remember.
I wonder, is what you're doing right now with your videos and your advocacy, are you trying to be what a young version of you might have been seeking out at that time?
I'm not sure. I'll kind of get into this at the moment because in some sense I'm a little bit just complaining about the nature of the world, and it's something I actually try to avoid doing. But because I think a young dude at my age does not need information like I can provide. I'll kind of get into it now in a second because
Of course, yeah.
I was sitting there and I was like looking around and I was saying to myself, all right, this isn't right. They're talking to me. Judith Butler's talking to me that like heteronormative people are evil, and the gender role theory comes from Judith Butler and all this stuff. I don't need to learn this stuff. I need to fulfill my potential. I need to become educated and shaped into something great. I need to do this. So I actually dropped out. I said, oh, I'm done with academics. And then I dropped out and I went and I took all my cash and I spent it on skills. I sort of formulated a simplistic idea in my head that theory is useless and skills are everything. So like, don't be sitting around reading your books and all this, go and try to get some skills. So I joined a boxing gym, joined a kickboxing gym, Muay Thai gym. I found a poet to teach me how to write poetry. I found a singer, an opera singer. I found a jazz singer. I found a jazz musician to teach me musicality, all this type of stuff. So I was going to all these guys with my like €40 a month dedicated to it, and I was paying one of them maybe a week and getting like 4 lessons off all of them. and doing this type of thing where I was creating my own sort of boyo education, if you want to put it this way. Now, I don't think it was well done. It was definitely not a good pedagogy and good curriculum, but it was very good instincts. I really thought I was correct in going after like skills and stuff like this. And so over the years, like a part of this was me reading Nietzsche and Jung alongside this, because these are what I noticed is that these are guys that talk about the fulfillment of human potential. So I noticed that I stopped allowing myself to read stuff that was not obsessed with this idea of excellence and human potential and stuff like this, and succeeding and making the most out of yourself, and the heroic journey and all this. So I got very much into like Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, and Nietzsche. These are very suitable for this. They have this feeling inside of the way that they talk that is trying to inspire that energy in you. They're great for like creators and poets and people like this. So I was really attached to these guys as a consequence. And then I guess over the years, I obviously started to talk about it on YouTube, and I started to talk about what that stuff means to me and why this stuff is important. I really think that if a young person in the education system wants to succeed, skills have to be superordinate, and that's just not in the education system at all, which is a disaster. It's basically like, it's just a brainwashing camp at this point, a theory cell production camp, if you want to put it this way. But that was really my big thing, was kind of that frame of thinking, that psychological space. And it covers a lot of different things, but I think that's sort of the root of what I was up to. And basically, as I got older and people like Jordan Peterson come along, and then maybe more extreme people would come along and I'd listen to them, they would basically explain that, like, the education system is a communist scam, basically. I was like, oh my God, yeah, actually it is. These people don't want your potential, because not only are they idiots, but they actively don't want to see you become creative, because that's antagonistic to what they want. And then finally, like, some things that people pointed out even more recently that I think is actually very true is that if you're Western European male, your creative potential and your culture is just like, you're just not supposed to have a voice. Like, you're just not useful to this society right now. They just want you to shut the fuck up and pay taxes and do shitty jobs so that they can make, they can take Lord of the Rings and make it a diversity cast and all this stuff. And so maybe I got a bit jaded then at that point when I saw that, but I think that kind of broadly covers the general trust then of what I'm at. It's like, all right, what do we do in this situation where we've got a load of young men, highly creative young men, and like a highly demoralized people, who want to start creating culture that is excellent instead of being resentful little fucks. How do we actually go about doing this stuff? How do you like overcome the miasma of the modern nihilism and all these type of things? And it all oscillates around that set of ideas. So it's a little bit all over the place, but there's a coherency there. I'm sure you're following.
Well, that's a very fascinating story, and I have one question based on that. Now, what I found in the university slash college slash academic sphere is that it's reached a point where it's more about consensus building. Some people call that the longhouse or whatever. And your frame of mind, your frame of reference is more about striking out in the unknown, a bit more ambitious. And I wonder, and you can tell me I'm full of shit for this, but I wonder, because you've already established yourself as an ambitious guy, and maybe that comes from somewhere else, that comes from somewhere within you. You didn't learn that, you just are that, right? So maybe the worldview that you're pursuing, like perhaps with Nietzsche, and we'll get into that in a second, is that only really applicable to a select few of people, meaning that not everyone in the world can be ambitious. Not everyone can be maybe aristocratic or whatever. So do you think there's, for you trying to reach out to young men, do you think there's some men that just can't for whatever reason, or they're not ready to hear this sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's two things I want to say about this. Let me actually write them down so I don't forget them, because I am prone to my rants, so I'll get lost.
No, dude,
But I guess
I've on record gone on tangents. I'm millennial recently. I got caught in a tangent and had to be like, I don't know what the fuck I'm saying now.
yeah, absolutely. So you were saying to me, is it an instance where oh yeah, and then education for mass potential. Okay, so the first thing I'd say, this is more just a caveat to what you're asking, which is a really good question, but I think this is an important caveat, and this is a very Nietzschean idea. It's worth sacrificing the average to the excellent always. Like, there's a broad rule is that most people maybe aren't ambitious, although I don't think that's necessarily true. But let's go with this idea that most people aren't ambitious and all this type of stuff. It's like, what the fuck are they doing in an institution designed to pull out your potential if you're not ambitious? Like, come on, like what is the situation there? Like, if the education system is to mean anything, it's supposed to harvest the talented people and get the absolute maximum out of them so that they can go into positions of creativity and leadership in society. You know, like one Elon Musk is worth a million people who are just lazy. Like it's just this type of the idea that the exceptions basically justify maybe all of existence. It's great man theory, I guess, in some sense. And the problem, the actual foundational problem with our many of our institutions is this equality over excellence, when it should be the other way around, excellence over equality value system. But we have an equality over excellence value system where we think about the mean, the bulk first. And we say like, all right, now everybody just wants sort of a house and a picket fence and they want to be left alone and all this type of stuff. And it's like, well, look, I don't think these people then we shouldn't build institutions necessarily focus on these people, or more importantly, we shouldn't build institutions that sacrifice the excellent to the focus of that. That's one thing. The second thing I'd say is also sort of derivative of this is based on this idea of like, what is the purpose of education? Like mass education now is a disaster in understanding its origin and first principle. Like the way the Greeks would educate is the education was, you know, reserved only. It's like the gym. Education in the gym was reserved only for the elite. The slaves could not train in the gym. Slaves could not get educated either. Education was designed to give the Spartan sons an advantage over the Helots. It was designed to make you better than everybody else. Education is designed to make you incredible, make you brilliant, make you powerful. Education is designed to get the most out of you. And if you have a tribe of Greeks in Athens or Sparta using education as a weapon in order to make their sons more powerful than everybody else's sons, that's the correct way to use education. You're supposed to be ambitious with these things. You're supposed to aim high with it as a consequence. Instead, our one is like, our education has sort of turned into drivel in many ways. And what's interesting psychologically about this is that an education designed for the excellent and designed for the few would probably be more successful for the mass of like it would awaken an awful lot of the many. I'd say about like 60% of people will probably get caught up in that, and maybe they won't be able to be the next Elon Musk, but they would actually certainly be able to participate in his projects because they have been taught to understand his value and understand how to make themselves fit within the plans of a great person. And you'll notice that all great people like Alexander the Great did not do it by themselves. They had massive armies of organized people who were following along with them. And so this is another sort of frame with this, which I think is so important. And the last thing well, maybe I'll leave it there because you probably have some thoughts and then I'll...
Oh, no, that's exactly what I wanted to know. And, you know, you got me, this wasn't one of the questions I was going to ask, but you got me thinking about it. And I suppose, first of all, to that point, last point you just made, arguably that is what education used to be until maybe a couple generations ago. And the relationship of regular people and what we might call great men was closer to this, even in America, up until like what, the 60s, 70s, maybe. So this wouldn't be an unfamiliar setup to people. But you know, it does make me think. There's something I've been thinking about recently, and I want to see what you think about it. So, in the dissident right, broadly right now, there's a lot of discussion about sort of populism versus what we might call an aristocratic way of thinking. And based on the vitality and virility of the types of momentum they're talking about, when people talk about elites, oftentimes they think people who are born into elites, like a nobility or a sort of hereditary elite, which is kind of what they have right now in America in a lot of ways. But do you think it's better? I'll put it shortly. Do you think it's better to become an elite from the bottom, like rising up from the bottom, or do you think it's better to kind of be a hereditary elite at the top? And this sounds like a kind of a weird question, but it's kind of like populism versus elite stuff. And the idea, we always have these stories about someone reaching elite status, coming up as a soldier and rising up the ranks. Do you think that's the ideal way to become an elite, or should you come from an elite family?
Yeah, off the bat, I'm going to say this is a bit of a false dichotomy or irony. I know, like, I'm not trying to be rude. I know you're not.
No, it's fine.
But it's great to be a hereditary elite. There's so many benefits that come with that. It's absolutely fantastic. And there's many fascinating theorists have come across over the years who've sort of explained why. Rittenhouse Kalergi, who's very famous for the Kalergi plan, as everybody talks about him, is actually a very smart dude. I've read his book a couple of times and I find him very fascinating. He is sort of behind this whole mass immigration project to Europe. But nonetheless, he's not an idiot. Like, he's actually very dynamic and interesting.
We actually talked about him last interview I had with a gentleman by the name of Zoltanis. He went into like the life story of Kalergi, which most people don't know, you know.
Yeah, man. Even the way he thinks he's very, very smart, you know. And one thing he talks about is politics, and he talks about the sort of like the upper caste, or you could say the aristocracy, or the embedded elite. And he talks about how they have a feel for politics that that most people don't have. And what do we mean by this? Well, it's like, you know, politics is like business. It's done on the golf course type idea. And so these high level elites, these well bred hereditary families, they know, they have networks, they have like friends of friends, they have blood relatives, they know the handshakes, they have like a cultural style about them. And so it's much easier for them to do big politics and for them to run organizations. And they also kind of like float in the background of many political institutions. And so, you know, when Trump comes to power, there's a load of like suits in the deep state, as they say, that are probably running the story, and they're nearly like hereditary positions probably at this point, or long-term positions and all this. So this type of stuff is like, there's great advantages to being an elite, and there's great value in it, and there's skills that they have that you just can't get if you're some type of populist ruckus rouser and all this type of stuff. On the flip side, well, and another thing as well is Nietzsche's idea that everything beautiful is inherited. Like, you can't rags to riches story is a beginning, and then, you know, it's a question of like, what do you do with your sons and your grandsons? That's where you turn it into something magnificent. So, a beginner, a creator is always the start. A kind of very common version of this would be somebody like Andrew Tate. I know an awful lot of people don't like him, but it's very interesting how he's got that new money instinct inside of him. And if you think about his like son, what would his son be able to do? Maybe project into the realm of politics, whereas like, you know, Tate doesn't really have that option for himself, because he's just a sort of like rags to riches story. He has a very specific life path. He has to be this sort of savage, crude monster, and like, he's a guy who came from the ghetto and is going to go up to the top. And then maybe his children will be much more refined and be able to present themselves much more intelligently in terms of propaganda. So they won't get like you know, banned off the internet and all these type of things. And this style of thinking, it kind of gives you a way of understanding what's going on here, the difference between like sophistication and beginning on the ground. But then the advantages of populism is unbelievable. Like, you know, it's very it really, like, when it comes down to any individual, it's a question of, what is your goal? Is your goal high? Is your goal worthy? And if it is, use any tool available to you. And if you find yourself that you're some like, you know, lowly ruckus, lowly member of the rabble, but you've got talent and you're able to rouse people up, and you can use the popular in order to do this, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, Trump utilizing the popular spirit of America against the entrenched deep state is not a bad thing. It's him being politically creative. Same with Mussolini, same with whoever you want to call it. And like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Julius Caesar did the same thing. Julius Caesar was an elite, but he utilized the populist in order to gain favor, and then, you know, secured an army and then used it to take over Rome. These are all perfectly, you know, the perfectly reasonable plays in the realm of enacting yourself in the world of infinite possibilities, I guess.
Yeah, I have a deep fascination with sort of rags to riches stories, and like you had said, what happens then? You know, listening to one example I had recently, this might be lost on many of our listeners, but I was listening to the autobiography of 50 Cent. And, you know, he was talking about his son, Marquise, and he goes pretty deep into his thoughts by saying, like, I didn't want my son to go through what I went through, but I actually don't understand what he's going through, because I don't know what it's like to have 50 Cent as a father. So you got this sort of rags to riches, thuggish guy, and he's entered a new stratosphere. And the only way he can exist as a family man is to like control this new entity called his son, who's wanted for nothing, who's been exposed to arguably living in a fucking 18-bedroom mansion owned by Mike Tyson, right? He doesn't know what to do with that. And his son kind of turned against him. That's the real drama of that story. And oddly enough, turned against him because of the influence of the mother figure. That's kind of like a bit of drama there. But that's something like the evolution of how you become a noble family has been of some point of interest for me. And in the 21st century as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, because again, it comes back to that idea that, like, the long-term organizational sophistication that Nietzsche would be talking, like, that's so difficult to pull off, like, even it's hard enough to go rags to riches, basically no one pulls it off. But then the next question, as like stabilizing that transgenerationally, it's like, bro, you're just out of this world. I actually love the Rothschilds, and I'm probably going to get media clipped for that, but I love the
No, he's
Rothschilds.
saying he loves the Rothschilds. He can't get in trouble for that.
I might get media clipped by the boys. That might be the
Oh yeah.
problem. They'll be like, um, I love the Rothschilds because their story is actually so much like this. They were very like effective organizers because they had the kind of progenitor father, and he was like, he was obviously understood that it's like if we were able to get into financial positions around all the royal thrones and be like court Jews for all the royal thrones, we could actually do some serious damage here. And he kind of begins this age of international finance, and they're learning from like the Renaissance Italians and stuff like this. And so he sets up his sons in all the different parts of Europe, and they set up this European hegemony over like high finance. And then of course like England, Napoleon, France, all this type of stuff, like great opportunities are taken advantage of correctly, and they end up just like basically putting themselves on top of the world, the richest family in the world, financing the British Empire, doing incredibly well for themselves. And it's so funny, like, because I remember looking into it, and it was, even for them, it's so hard for them to stop entropy seeping in. So
Yeah.
what happens is they have like they have a load of children, and one of them decides to be an artist, and then they get like a girl and she wants to buy a load of paintings, and it's just like the stupidest waste of money ever. And then they get some son, and he's into the finance stuff, but he's not that good. He's more like the conscientious son, but not the genius like maybe his great grandfather was, or something like this. And eventually things start to buckle, and then one of the banks in France, I think, fails, for example, just on its own lack of merit and whatnot. And it's an astounding thing to think that like the century beforehand, they were ruling the world. And then by the 1960s, they're sort of like, it's just diluted. And then the inheritance is kind of like split up and all these type of things. And it's just really hard to contain that entropy. And I don't know, maybe they're running things behind the scenes with a more stylish way that I can't see. But you see this problem.
Yeah. I
And
think that's
this
a
is
common enough story, though. The after a few generations, and the best marker of that is going with the Rothschilds. There is one, I don't know, someone's cousin or a daughter, but she cheated on her husband. Again, well-off Jewish guy, cheated on her husband and shacked up with Jay Electronica, who is like a Nation of Islam Black American rapper who doesn't release albums, so he's sitting around stoned and playing video games all day in like the Rothschild penthouse in London or New York or something. I'm like,
yeah.
that's not a good sign of health, right?
It's yeah, this is it, and it's a really interesting question. And so like that's the elite you're dealing with. And then you have like I guess this kind of comes down to the educate, to try to bring it full circle in some fucking possible way. This mess is really, really hard to manage. This entropy is really, really hard to manage. And the kind of purpose of education initially was an elite institution to make sure that this was controlled for as much as possible. Like that's really what they're trying to do, is resist entropy as much as they can through education. Like the whole purpose of education was almost like eugenically imposing stress upon a comfortable Spartan king, a comfortable Spartan prince. He would get booted out into the wilderness, or like the Athenians would have him in the gym training and wrestling and whatnot. And so they're trying to institute, first of all, a culture around him. They're really tightly trying to control that culture, because like, why did that Rothschild shack up with some black rapper? It's because the Rothschilds weren't able to inoculate their daughters against like liberal ideals, I guess you could say, or liberal global hegemony of culture. And so the purpose of education for in the earliest sense was to try solve this problem by instantiating good culture and getting together, like just making strong people, and that's really kind of its purpose. And I think this is what's so annoying for what was so annoying for me, is that I grow up and I go into the education system, and I'm not part of a good culture. It's not something that's going to fulfill my potential. It's not going to lead to me changing my situation, and it becomes an absolute pain. I'm sort of like have to go my own way and figure it out by myself. And
Well, I think a lot of people are going through what you went through, because in one hand, the nature and the value of our elites and our aristocrats, whatever you want to call them, has changed, of course, over centuries. But then also, this is something I know Edward Dutton has spoken about how the legitimacy of academia itself has begun to fall, and we may enter into a paradigm where the truly intellectually ambitious people no longer identify academia as a way to do what you wanted to do, which is explore the unknown. It will just be for sheer credentialism, which is a very
Mhm.
shallow and hollow way of looking at status. And that you're just in the wilderness because, first of all, again, we can talk the race angle of like, oh, white men can't get into university and college. I'm like, that's true. Where are they going? Because they still want these skills, they still want this knowledge. They're kind of doing what you did and figuring it out on their own. I think there's a real, vitality and a poetry to that in a way.
Yeah, and that's actually a fascinating thing because I think that spirit, that like of the the wandering white man trying to figure out his way through the modern world, that spirit is much closer to the energy of early science as well, because it was sort of a gentleman's club of dudes shit posting on their version of the internet, which was the men of letters, circling around the lettered writings of all these scientists and whatnot. That's like literate Europe was actually a bit like Twitter, where they were all passing their books among each other. Such a funny different time, but that was a very private conversation. It wasn't as public as maybe information is now, and it was siloed off among all the people who could read and maybe who understood the context of science and whatnot. And in the 20th century, that like the mass man really rose up, and everything began to shift in a different direction, and science became formalized as like this peer review groupthink type thing, like just the anti spirit, the scientific genius, completely shows up. And then it accumulates in essentially what we have now, which is the credentialism, which is the the complete opposite of the spirit of science, basically. A lot of these guys were spending all their time complaining about the church being arrogant enough to present itself as an authority in reality, and they were trying to come up with ways that they could figure out reality, like basically look for God without the church, without an authority between them. And look at us now, we've got this nonsense. But of course, that's what's going to happen. Like, these institutions, as idiotic as it is, are going to be given up. Most of the talent will leave them. They'll start to create sort of alternate institutions, which is already basically forming in the internet. But I don't think they'll be directed in the same pursuit for knowledge, because that can't happen in its pure sense anymore. Instead, I think an awful lot of the problem is going to be a pursuit of power and a pursuit of institutional power, because that's just fundamentally the issue we have right now. And I'm just not sure like science can be done at the moment and the way things are.
To relate this back to Nietzsche, and first of all, I have a couple of questions. One, and this to give a bit of a preamble here, I read Nietzsche when I was in high school, and I don't think my mind was developed enough to really understand Nietzsche. But I have the Antichrist, I have Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I have Beyond Good and Evil, and the Twilight of the Idols, I think.
That's like 4 sticks of dynamite right there. Jesus.
Exactly. And I need to return to them as an adult because I know I can really see more. But with that having been said, first of all, is it Nietzsche or Nietzsche? Because I don't want to sound like an ass here.
You're good. I think the Americans tend to call him Nietzsche.
Okay.
And I like Nietzsche because you can rhyme more stuff with it. Naughty, nasty, screechy Nietzsche. So that's what I love calling him.
And you do that because you also do music as well. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, but
maybe we could go into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted so people know this is a good rhyming mind right here.
There you go. That's the stuff. Rapper Steph. Looking to get my Rothschilds girlfriend by my rapping skills.
I wanted to also ask, so what we were talking about just before, and I preambled by saying I know a lot of Nietzsche's ideas, but obviously I don't have as in-depth of a knowledge as you do. So you can make fun of me as much as you want for getting things wrong. But for what we were talking about, would that be related to the slave versus master mentality? And if you'd like to sort of unpack that for us.
Not particularly. No, like maybe a little bit, but not really. I guess the way you could frame it is well, all right. First of all, Nietzsche is actually the correct way to pronounce it. If you're going to go with German, by the way, I'll just put that down. But Nietzsche is fine. Everybody says it. I don't think it's a big deal. I never really get caught up in those type of things. With the master and slave thing, I think the most important thing to understand about that is it's a psychological mechanism. I actually think if Nietzsche could have been the foundation of modern psychology instead of Freud, it would have been such a benefit to Western civilization, because Nietzsche's describing a problem that we get between being a winner and being a loser. So when you're a winner, a master, basically. Your experience of life is very, you could call it natural, but it's very interesting what that means in terms of how you relate to your emotions. Your soul is the source of your emotions, the chthonic energies moving through your body. So how do we make decisions? How do we do things in the world? Well, I go walk down the street and I see a beautiful girl, and I feel inside of me this urge, this lust inside of me, and I want to go and I want to be with her. Now, what nature's trying to do there is get me to procreate so that I can create, the next generation of Stephs, so we can try take on the Rothschilds or whatever it is. But what happens with this is that if I'm a handsome winner, if I'm big, tall, strong, blue-eyed, tanned, 7 foot tall or something like that, whatever it is, I find it very easy to go up to talk to that girl, and then she's going to be like very receptive to me because I'm absolutely gorgeous. And then I'm going to be able to breed with her, I'm going to be able to make love with her. And then the experience that I have is that I feel an urge. I go up and talk to the girl is completely compliant, and then I get to release that urge basically as an orgasm. And then I get to breed, and then I create a kid, and then it's like absolutely fantastic. And so my experience of life is actually like very natural. There's very little restriction. It's urge and then rewarded with pleasure at the end of it. And I get rewarded with pleasure. I get rewarded with higher testosterone, a better sense of myself, all these types of things. So the master's experience is one of like infinite winning, if you want to put it this way. Now, the slave, or the failure, the loser, is much, much, much different, but on only one really key point. The loser might be walking down the street and he sees the beautiful girl, but he can't have her because he's not good enough. He's maybe got he's a chin cell, he's got a pencil neck, whatever it is. He's not as pretty. And so when he goes and he tries to talk to the girl, he experiences rejection. The girl like pukes on the floor, or she like spits at him, or she slaps him in the face or whatever. She just like throws her nose up and she walks on. And he doesn't get to be with her. He doesn't get to be inside of her. He doesn't get to orgasm, any of these type of things. And so he gets no pleasure. In fact, what happens is that energy that he felt does not go away. It stays stuck inside of him and it cannot be released. And this becomes a very big issue. So he has this big wealth of desire, and it gets castrated, or it gets frustrated. It gets stuck inside of his body. And now he has to do something with this. And this is a very, very big problem. So what he has to do is kind of decide for himself, like, where am I going to put this energy? What's going to go on? And he doesn't make this in any way a conscious choice. This usually happens very, very unconsciously. So the energy cannot be created or destroyed. It must be distorted. So it might turn into frustration, and he might like start punching the mirror, punching the wall and screaming. He might attack the girl. He might go a little bit fucking crazy and be like, why don't you love me, or something like this. Or he might sit there in depression. It might turn into this horrible, heavy energy, and he'll sit there in his room depressed, and he'll get stuck in his mind, and he'll say, I'm terrible and I'm evil, and then he'll like might blow his brains out. Or he might start to feel envy towards the winner, or something like this. Or he might start to feel frustration, and he might turn around to himself and say, you know what? I'm not going to be a little fucking bitch here. I'm going to be a hero. And he might try to, go hit the gym or something like this and become something great, whatever it is. Now, this is really important because in reaction to failing, the loser is transforming his situation, is being confronted with this need to make sense of this emotion, to become emotionally intelligent, to become emotionally sophisticated. He has to confront his passions in a much more different way and learn how to express them in alternate ways. And this sets this foundation for what the difference between the master and the slave is that the slave is usually more in his head, more deep, more perceptive, more psychological, whereas the master is much more instinctive, intuitively intelligent, and beautiful and successful, and sort of righteous, because everything, he's like a lion, everything he does just works because he's brave and strong and handsome. And there's an awful lot of fascinating psychological consequences that come as a result of this. For example, the master is prone to being a little bit naive, a little bit kind of like unintellectual. And the slave is prone to be very, very crafty, very, very, very inventive. So the slave can come up with this idea of becoming, he's like, all right, the Chad master is a football player. The slave will be like, right, I can never be the football player. So what I'll do is I'll go, or the loser, sorry, he'll go and he can never be a football player. So he'll go and become like a musician or a trumpet player or something like this. And then he'll woo the girl with poetry and fashion and style. And this is very interesting. He's invented this whole new way of presenting himself to the world that actually won the girl. And so he's actually quite creatively created this new style to take on the world that actually is quite evolutionary intelligent. It's quite psychologically powerful. The slave is craftier. The slave can do all sorts of fascinating things. And so, and then another dynamic of this is that the slave is usually resents the master. He resents the loser resents the winner. So he will look at Chad and he'll be like, I hate that guy. I hate how he's so arrogant and he's so impulsive and all these types of things, and I hate how he just like thinks he's so cool because of his muscles. His muscles are just compensation for his fragile little ego and all this type of stuff. And so the slave will be prone to this type of bitterness and this type of resentment towards the master. And these types of relationships, this psychological dynamic, I think is the root of it. The more you dig into this, and I can talk about it at length if you so wish, and the more you start to see the genius of what Nietzsche was actually pointing out here.
Well, it's interesting because, as you're describing that, there's certain images flashing before my eyes, and the last one that I landed on was, the difference between a monarchy and the French Revolution. Essentially they have very similar forms, but one was coming from a place of bitterness. I'm going to kind of work with that and say that there's this one phrase that I always keep thinking of, and I'm going to try and relate it to this in a second. But it's the slave never dreams of being free. The slave always dreams of being king. And within the French Revolution, you see something like that. Like the king, the master wants, what does he want? He wants power. He wants this. He has a goal, and that goal might even be immaterial, but that's getting the woman. But the slave has to always exist within the context of the king. And then when he becomes king, what does he want to do? He wants to punish. He wants to destruct the world. Mm-hmm. So he's not even capable of having that power. And he can never transcend it because everything will just be almost a cruel parody of that thing he resents. And so that's why I brought the French Revolution, where it's like, it's this great, brilliant thing that rose up, but it's driven by that sort, what I would call a resentment of this monarchy and this aristocracy as they saw. And then what form did that take? Well, just the reign of terror. Now, does anything that I just said make sense?
No, it's actually incredibly perceptive. And I think I'll kind of get into the framework that I understand what Nietzsche was saying about with this, because the master and slave is presented as a relationship between tribes. Now, I like to try ground these things in simple analogies so we can kind of think about them from first principles. So I'm talking about the sort of psychosexual dynamic between a winner and a loser. And it creates this emotional relationship, this psychological relationship of naive master who gets to express himself and aims for, as you said, like the girl or power, these very natural goals, these with a very good conscience. He wants something that everybody says is evil, like powers. Like, no, he's like, I want to win, I want to conquer, I want to take, I want to create, I want to build a future, all these type of things. And the slave has this problem where he can't have those things, so he has to develop this fundamental resentment, and he has to come up with this creative way of changing the world order, whatever it is. And as you said, the Chad is often the focus of his mind. And then how does this scale to groups? And this is where Nietzsche begins to bring it in. Nietzsche's not really talking about American Pie, psychosocial relationships or anything like that. He's talking obviously about groups. He's talking about actually some astounding things he discusses, such as, for example, Christianity and Rome and the Jews. And oh man, it's just amazing. But the French Revolution is a brilliant one. I actually think this might be the most significant idea for Western man to understand. Every single Western person needs to digest this to the absolute shocking depths of what it actually means, because it is the single problem that we have, dealing with the resentment of the conquered, I guess you could say, or the other, if you want to put it this way. Yes, when you have a conquering people, a master race, and we don't mean this in the 20th century Nazi way, but we mean this in the master race is in the conquering race, the leading race. The Romans were masters, the Russian monarchy were masters, the French were masters. Arguably, the Germans were never masters. That's quite an intro, or not masters recently. But anyway.
Also, before people get pissed off, this is how the Chinese essentially see themselves as well.
Interesting. Yeah, there you go. These conquering people usually have obviously a majority that they're ruling over. The English ruling over the Irish, and the relationship is always, as you pointed out, going to be resentment, because the master. This is even more brutal than maybe the psychosexual dynamic. This is literally like, all right, the slave wants Stacy, the slave wants power, the slave wants the girl, and the master is fucking her. The master has her, And in order for him to get the girl, he has to get rid of the master. And the slave's experience is never going to be futuristic. It's always going to be like squarely aimed at the master, as you said, as the guy who's with the girl. And so the psychological relationship between the king and the people is very dangerous, because the people bluntly and deeply resent him really intensely. And he has to work very hard to win their favor. And often he can, like quite a large amount of people usually like love kings and stuff like this. Like the French very much love them. But there are these emotions of resentment that can be stirred up very, very easily by a rival elite who want to get rid of the king, if you want to put it this way. And this resentment is shocking, because it's full of this like vengeful fantasies of attacking these. There's another dynamic to this that's so interesting, is how the conquered, the slave, is very conscious. They always remember. This is related to another Nietzschean psychological idea, such as the idea of where we get happiness from. So he has this phrase where he says, "Blessed are the forgetful, because they get the better even of their mistakes." And he points out consistently that happiness is related to letting go, is related to forgetting. It's almost like some type of self-help shit. Let go, just let go and surrender to the moment. But that really is what happiness is all about. That's what the highest experiences of pleasure are like. It's forgetting, it's giving into the moment, it's surrendering, these types of things. And so when you're a powerful conquering master, it's very easy for you to be happy, because it's very easy for you to let go. There's a large amount of security around you. Also, you're very instinctive. You're not very intellectual, so you're very much in the moment naturally. You're very powerful, so you can relax an awful lot easier. You're full of energy, full of power. It's much easier for you to let go and be happy. You've conquered people, and they are now serving you, so you can, make them do all the work, and you can laze around and be happy and let go and all these type of things. Now, this leads to you being naive. This leads to you getting a little bit out of touch. You're definitely happy and joyful, but you become a little bit, not fully in touch with the streets, as they say these days. The slaves are the opposite. The experience of being a loser is trauma, and trauma is pain. And pain is what creates consciousness. If you experience pain, you become aware of the part of your body that was hurt. If you stub your toe, what happens? All of a sudden, your toe, which you have not thought about all fucking day, becomes the center of your focus. Trauma is consciousness. Trauma brings us to awareness. These things are fundamentally tied. And so the slave remembers. The slave cannot forget. The slave cannot be happy, because he is traumatized. He is stuck remembering. He is like some guy who lost in a boxing match. The winner goes and he goes and gets drunk and bangs a prostitute or whatever he does, or maybe a ring girl. Whereas the dude who lost sits at home with a concussion, with the images of him getting beaten up and getting humiliated playing over and over in his head. He remembers failure. He remembers, and it hurts and it burns and it gets scarred onto his soul. And so this becomes a very serious problem, because then the slaves, the conquered, are wrapped up in this cycle of remembering trauma. And this becomes a big issue, because they want redemption from this trauma. They want justification. They want the wound to be healed. They want resolution to this trauma. All energy wants to be expressed in some way. And pain is a form of energy. And so these people are sitting there, and they're in their heads stewing over the fact that the French king humiliated them and conquered them and set up his monarchy, or whatever it is, if you want to use it for modern context. Like, for example, the Irish are always pissed off at the English for conquering us. You can see in modern America, or the West in general, the colonial projects, all the minorities are really pissed off about that.
I was just about to say, I'm like, what you're essentially describing is the modern Black experience in America, in my opinion.
So it's a broad stroke thing, because yes, it's the Black experience in America. It's the Jews' relationship to the Western people in general because of the Holocaust. It's the Irish. Like I know this so well because I'm Irish, and it's like it just floored me when I actually began to understand this, because I live within a slave culture. Like the English, like if I stub my toe, it's the English's fault. It's amazing how we think so resentfully, and we're not like, it's so unconscious how bitter we are. Because the English all 800 years ago conquered us. And then when you look into it, it's like, it wasn't even the English, it was the Normans. And it's like, forget about that. But there's this story you put in your head as a slave where you got conquered. Conquest is not nice. They famine you, the fucking English, they steal your potatoes. And then what happens? Like, a lot of people die. Like, this is sort of true. It was a very brutal, essentially, murder. And basically half our population died, and that shit sticks with you, man. That you become jaded, you become bitter, and then you become highly animated by pain to do something about it. And this is a really important thing to understand, because since the slave feels pain, since he feels trauma, he becomes conscious. He becomes far more aggressively animated, and he becomes far more crafty. And he also starts to develop this imaginative revenge. He starts to imagine a sort of redemption from this situation. The Irish would sit there and they would imagine, all right, we need to get our nation. And the English could never properly understand, like, why the fuck did they care about their nation so much? Why do they need to, get this national movement up and going? But this was our way of expressing redemption from the trauma that they caused us. And the English were sort of like, look, we've got this awesome empire. The Irish can hop in their ships and go to anywhere. And like, the Irish basically were there. There was always about 15% of the British army was like, Irish or Scottish Gael or something like this. And so they were sort of part of the project. And the English would have this far bigger view. They're sort of saying to themselves, we're running the world, but us Irish are sitting down there and we're stewing in this idea of just pulling the small part of the empire off the English. This is the biggest thing in our minds. Whereas the English are sort of like, we fucking rule every part of the planet. Like, we're the biggest badasses ever. How do we run this empire? How do we deal with the rise of like a super rival in Germany and whatnot? Not Nazi Germany, sorry. But in Germany, how do we deal with super rivals? Whatever about that. And so you can see this fantasy, this vengeance boil up. And this becomes a very serious problem, because if that vengeance takes over, the masters, first of all, are very naive about it. They don't understand the depths of it because they just can't understand that amount of pain. They've never hated something like that in their lives. Nietzsche says the greatest haters are always the weak. And then because they're unaware of this stuff builds up. And these fantasies go out of proportion, and the masters often aren't severe enough with it. And then when it's too late, it blows up into something they can't control. And then this is what happens. You have the slave revolt. And then the slaves pull down the masters, and exactly as you described, they take control, but then you realize that all they wanted to do was punish. Be wary of all people who have a strong impulse to punish. And when they punish, they are psychopathic. They are unbelievably cruel. It's like impossible to understand the depths of their cruelty. They take the monarchs and they cut their heads off. They humiliate women. They strip them naked, rape them, and then cut their heads off. It's absolutely absurd. I think the communist revolution in Russia is just amazing to see this, because it's the exact pattern. You have the naive, doltish, out of touch Romanovs who don't realize what's going on. It gets steamrolled by all these savvy, crafty weirdos like, Raskolnikov or whatever the fuck his name is, and Lenin, and all these really, really sharp Bolsheviks who stir up the resentment of the masses and aim it at the kulaks, the middle class, and the Romanovs. And when they get control of the state, you see fucking a Hieronymus Bosch painting show up. These people are pulling people out in the street, gutting children out of women's bellies, boiling people in fucking cauldrons. It's like, what the fuck is even this is insane. Like, how is this happening? The gulags, like, you know the story. And this
also
is
the Haitian Revolution's another great example of that, the atrocities there.
Yeah, and this is it. And like I hear about it in South Africa, man. Like I know a South African girl, and I was talking about her, and she was describing just some of the, like, it's a very horrible thing to talk about, but like the hate rapes. Like they go in and they kill, they just invade a farm, murder the grandfather, and then just do terrible things to the women, and then cut their heads off and stuff. And you're like, Jesus Christ, like, what is going on here? And French Revolution was the same thing. Like, and it's always the same pattern. This is another fascinating thing about it, is that it's presented as a beautiful idea. The French go up and they talk to you about, oh, this is for liberty, fraternity, and equality. The communists are saying this is for equality. And then when they get power, it's a bloodbath. There was a reign of terror. There was the madhouse of the communist revolution. It's the same thing with the Irish. It's hilarious. The Irish had their great noble fight against the English that we all hear about, and it was very brave and ballsy, and it takes a big thing to organize this political stuff. But what happened straight away afterwards? A fucking civil war where we all started murdering each other. Like, it's just like the second you get it, you don't know what to do. You're like a dog chasing a wheel, and it's the true face of what's going on kind of shows up. And so what you see stirring up in the West right now is this exact energy at a scale that I don't think we've ever seen in world history, to be perfectly honest. And it's extremely important for Western people to become spiritually vaccinated against it, because the Western people are in the position of naivety. They are in some sense hereditary conquerors, and they just don't get it. And there's one last thing, but go on, you're going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, as you're describing that, we're giving all these examples pulled from history, and I was wondering, do we see something similar to that going on in this thing called the dissident right? Because when I see a lot of the young men now, they seem to be overtaken by fantasies of revenge. They're dreaming of being king. What's going to happen the day when we're on top? There's no longer time horizon than the vengeful revolution that they have in their hearts. And I just see a lot of commonalities there.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of ways that this manifests. I think there's one sort of there is the problem of the loser. You know, there's the problem of like a lot of these people are disenfranchised, and their experience of the Western world is very, very negative, and so they want to burn it all down and they hate it and all this. There's a lot of resentment towards the Jews, and like obviously there's power structures in the world and whatnot, but there is this like, you know, it kind of distorts into this almost like cartoonish fantasy of hate, and like they rule all of world history and stuff like this, and it's like obviously there's a bit of nuance there. There's these problems with this type of stuff, and this is absolutely true. And I think this is what's so fascinating about this psychological mechanism, is that you can't escape from it. You can't be bigger than it. You know, like as I said, I'm Irish, and so it would be great for me to read this stuff and be like, oh, I'm the master, of course, I'm the badass, I'm the blonde beast that Nietzsche talked about. But when you read through it, you realize that you're very much, you're human all too human, and all of us have this issue. Like we all have these. If we're in this position of losing, we have this problem, and if you're in a position of winning, you probably have naivety installed inside of you that you have to be careful about. And so, I think absolutely, I think this is such a healthy thing for people to meditate on in general, because they'll have a bit of that resentment inside of themselves, and it's very important to ask a question about like, how do you deal with this? A good example of Nietzsche's advice on how to deal with this is to correctly digest and interpret envy, develop emotional intelligence with envy. So when you envy somebody, you have to kind of ask yourself, all right, I envy somebody. Why? Well, I envy them because they're superior to me in some way. How can I use this frustration I have to motivate me to outcompete them, to develop a competitive mindset, and to understand their virtues and try to incorporate them and think about what's going on? So a lot of people in the dissident right don't like maybe the cabals that have taken over the world. Well, it's like, well, where's our very down-to-earth, grounded seriousness, where we're setting up networks of focused on institutional power and stuff like that? That's not really there. All we do is we sit around and theory sell and talk about podcasts, and I'm not really sure that counts as what you actually should be looking for. And so you can kind of see a very simple example there of the difference between pragmatic people who are going to secure power and complainers who want to sit around and you know, say extreme things online because it's a sort of like I don't know, rebelling against the culture or something like this. And yeah, man, I think this phenomenon is very prominent.
Yeah, and you had mentioned there, and this is sort of a theme you had developed over the course of this talk, but also a few of your videos as well. I think you had one video, the exact title escapes me, but it was something about Nietzsche was anti-books, or books are for idiots, something like that. And I thought it was such a great title. And I think what you were getting at was not being what we call the theory cell, not becoming so like crafting labyrinths of theory to lose yourself in. Would that be a fair? If you want to go in that video as well and talk about what Nietzsche thought, that we could do that too.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just talk about this because I actually think this is a very, very valuable thing to think about. This is maybe going a little bit more towards the question of like, what is knowledge? What is value? What is truth? Like these type of things. You do see the right-wing movement in a weird way has sort of come out of the old truther movement from my experience, because I remember the internet in the early days, like about 10 years ago, was when I was a very young man. I would see, like just out of my teenage years, I would see films like Zeitgeist, and they're talking about how George Bush was running 9/11 and how Jesus was an Egyptian god and stuff like this. You know, it was like the conspiracy theory, the actual genuine like conspiracy targets.
I remember that. I was paying attention to that same stuff too.
Yeah, this is it. And that was a big meme going around, I remember. And out of that comes like 4chan, not out of that comes 4chan, but 4chan was very parallel to that. You know, 4chan is sort of saying they have a negative plan for us, don't trust the elite and all these type of things. And they turned out to be very correct about an awful lot of stuff, you know, and there was every reason to be very, very suspicious of the elite. It turned out to be like very practical and real. and this is where it started to ground itself in the political movement. Trump sort of forms it as something that has a spine in the real world. Nonetheless, like the energy that an awful lot of this was coming from was like, conspiracy theorists, online pontificators, esoteric posters about the nature. Like, there's a very big problem with this because that's inherently anti-action. That's inherently sort of like pontificating, pondering, thinking about like, what's the nature of the world. Then there's like a lot of philosophy cells, because when you're trying to ask yourself, I guess maybe I'll try to describe this in simpler terms. We all grew up liberals in some sense. We all were in the liberal paradigm. And I guess even till very recently, most of us weren't even dissidents against the liberal paradigm. And it's only very recently, when the mask has come off the regime, that we have kind of woken up for that and said, I don't want to participate in this culture anymore. I don't like it. And as a consequence of that, an awful lot of people have had their worldviews fall apart in front of them. And so their challenge is that they're trying to put their worldviews back together. They're trying to construct a worldview for themselves that stabilizes their understanding of reality. And so this is where you see an awful lot of like the philosophy stuff. I've done this as well. We're all like, you shouldn't even be guilty of it, but I'm guilty of it too. I'm trying to make sense of what's going on in the world. Jordan Peterson shows up and does a little bit of this. A lot of guys are getting into Christianity now because it gives people such a stable Weltanschauung, a stable worldview. But a worldview is not a solution. Like it's not going to do really as much as we hope it would do. The people who have power right now are pragmatists fundamentally. Like the people who have power right now seized institutions, and they have institutional operations to make sure that they can propagate their goals and their ideas and their plans. They're very down to earth and grounded in power operations. They certainly have their theories, I'm sure, but it's very much contextualized with action. Like what would change the nature of the West is seizing the education system, establishing principled policies that transform the way education is promulgated. It would be seizing social media companies and transforming the censorship paradigms. It would be seizing political companies and transforming the purposes of nation states. It would be getting into cultural spaces like health and fitness and transforming how they operate. It would be building companies or getting into major agricultural companies and changing the industry standards of the food supply. These very specific operational actions, that's what's going to lead to genuine, massive cultural change. And it's not necessarily theoretical. Like all these guys, all of us, like again, I'm guilty of this too. We have these very astute ability to pay attention to details, and we spend all that energy on trying to decide, is it monism, or is God Orthodox, or was God Catholic, or is God is Nietzsche right and is God made up or something like this? And it's like an awful lot of that is just completely redundant and irrelevant, because that attention to detail focused on these down-to-earth pragmatic operations would be much more effective and lead towards much more tangible goals. Now, of course, across the board, this is quite a broad stroke statement, but I think it's a very helpful way of thinking. And you'll notice that it's an anathema to most people. People hate this idea of like, oh, I should be doing practical things, because that actually involves you getting down into the devil in the details of things that actually make results. And that's quite boring and difficult and takes actual disciplined work and sustained focus. And just to kind of wrap this up, because I know I'm somewhat ranting, I notice an awful lot on like Twitter. I love Twitter sphere. There's like this whole side of Twitter called Money Twitter. And there you have all these guys who are like almost anti-theory. And so these guys don't really world model very well. So they don't realize that the West is under much more of a threat than like, Tate would say it's the Matrix. And they're all like, oh, the Matrix, bro. And it's like, bro, it's way worse than the Matrix, bro. Like it's not good what's happening right now. But they don't have the world modeling capacity to do this because they don't spend enough time in it. But these guys are just such efficient operators. Like they're able to drum up a drop shipping store using the international supply chains to get themselves like 100K a month and stuff. It is oftentimes more. And this is really important to understand, because these guys utilize their operational procedural thinking in order to gain tangible success in the world. And they set up operations for themselves. And this is what's such a pity for an awful lot of the quote unquote dissident movements, is that many of these guys in like Money Twitter are free, but their value systems are very naive and shallow. And many of the dudes with the very deep and complicated value systems are sending DMs to me and asking like, bro, how do I monetize my account and all this type of stuff? And it's like, they're fucking broke working a job and all this. And that's shit. And I understand that's not ideal at all. But think about the difference in approaches that's going on here. Now, if you could maybe forget about money, but go over to these Money Twitter guys and understand this operational efficiency and direct it towards politics or some type of, like, as we say, cultural institution or education or something like this. How far could you penetrate into one of those things? Because right now, like, it's a problem of like mass incompetence and all this. So look, I'll wrap it up there because I'm going to go into too much. But
No,
it's basically,
that's very
go on.
good. You said a lot of very, very fascinating things. That a couple of comments on there. I just so you probably don't know this, but my background is in marketing and business development. And one thing that I had some wisdom I'd accumulated over time was that we try to avoid what people would call paralysis through analysis. And
Mhm.
I've always just rephrased that as I think momentum through action is better than strategy.
Mhm.
And this is, you see this in a lot of different forms, especially in the startup world where I've done a lot of work, which is that it's better to test and actively test and optimize than be in a room and create this perfect strategy and then roll it out. And it's better, you can actually learn better and faster that way. And one thing that came to mind as you were talking was we covered this book called Coup d'etat by Edward Luttwak, which is a fascinating book. And it's about essentially how to overthrow the government by a famous geopolitical analysis and analyst. What the fuck am I saying? And it was using historical examples of from coups that were successful and those that failed and why. And also, it took you a step by step way to actually overthrow the government through the military. And one point he made in it that I likened to what you were saying was that usually there is a planning period in a coup, but when you're getting people on your side to build that momentum and then really capitalize on that the day of, one thing you noticed was you will try and get people on your side with a bit of ideology, but you're purposefully vague. And during the coup d'etat, you actually don't want to come with a full itemized list of what you're trying to accomplish. You keep it vague. You say, what we're promising is change and we're going to make it better. And then you kind of let the individuals fill that with whatever their ideology is. And then they never really question it. But which is to say that the less detail of the theory and ideology, the more effective it is. Because if the people pulling off the coup came with a full fucking book about what they're going to accomplish, no one would actually go along with them. So it's almost like the addition of too much theory paralyzes you. It makes so you can't pull off these grand sweeping movements. What do you think about that?
I think it's an astounding observation. You know, I think it's one of the hardest punches in the jaw any young intellectual man can take, because we will have this prone side of us that will romanticize theory. You know, like coming out of college, I read Nietzsche and Jung, and I was so blessed that I had that foundation in me, that instinct to be very skill orientated. Like, that's sort of what I meant, is that I knew that there's something vague, there's something lacking in that theory stuff. Of course, I didn't quite articulate it till later. But then when I got into reading and philosophy and all this type of stuff, I always had a way to contextualize it. And I've met an awful lot of people since who never had that. And for that, for many reasons, then they become. And you know what's interesting is they're not even that good at philosophy. Like, they're very good at picking up the words, but it's almost like, because they can't contextualize it. And there's all sorts of neuroscience behind this I can get into. Because they can't contextualize it, it's almost like they don't understand what they're saying. It's like they can actually, like a filing cabinet, accumulate large amounts of information and organize it in their heads, almost like an artist. But it's not like the information, they're able to like ground it in any type of reality, and they don't have this instinct for a stupid idea or a good idea and all this. And it's like Ludwig, basically, it sounds like he just basically wrote a Fed post or something like this, but that's brilliant. Like, that's exactly the kind of stuff that I think I find very, very fascinating, is that you sit down and, you know, you would think that the perfect plan is what you'll need, and you need to have this like thesis that everyone will be like perfect. But it's like, in reality, you know, a couple of bullet points that rouse up the emotions, is there you go, that's all you fucking need. You're absolutely sorted and whatnot.
And what my,
And
my
so,
co-host would say, he likes referring to this, and I like it a lot. He says it's a cargo cult, and so he would say those individuals who just collect words and collect things to kind of put themselves above others. It's like a cargo cult for revolutionaries or for intellectualism. Like they have all the stuff, they don't know how it works, but they think if they just kind of keep it around them, then something will happen. You know.
yeah, yeah, and this is it. And there's something earnest in it, because I do think they mean well, but it's a problem because it's all this libido is spent in this intellectual space, and it's like what like is there actually any serious results to come out of this stuff? It's not like we like Nietzsche was complaining about this in relationship to like German philosophy of his day, because there was these guys filling up massive books blathering on about like conceptualizations and all this stuff, and he was like, listen, like all this is junk. It's not really going to have that much of a difference. It's not going to make that much of a difference to an awful lot of stuff. um like sharper, more penetrating thoughts are just much more valuable. And he was basically like trying to put out this epistemological first principle, where we have to be able to look at the pursuit of knowledge as being something that can almost stifle the pursuit of life. And that's a very, very wise thing to wake up to. It's like, and truly the word wisdom is important here. It's like realizing that seeking after knowledge without tethering it to a context can lead to this like castration in some sense, or getting stuck in your head. It's like I was talking about the nerd and the jock. Imagine the guy who sees this like beautiful, sexy girl, and he wants to figure out how to be with her. And his strategy is to go on the internet and read all the red pill forums and all the theory. And there's a kind of point where he could do that. Like I remember I did that. And I kind of read it for a while, and then I went out and I just started like like they basically say you should approach loads of girls, and I'm like, nice. So I went out and I started doing that, and that kind of the action allowed me to just do that and not really get too deep into it. And then I started to meet some guys who were into it, because you'd see them on the forums and stuff like this, and I would speak to them, and they would have no bitches, they'd have no girls around them. You know, they're not good with girls. But they can literally explain to me with such precision and such detail all the lore, all the characters in the red pill sphere or the pickup game or whatever it is. They could explain to me all these ideas, all these conceptions. I'd be talking to a girl, and then I'd like, you know, he'd talk to me afterwards, and he'd explain to me all the like the negs and stuff like that would happen. And it was actually bizarre, is that this guy's brain, almost like a parasite, had taken over him and given him this dopaminergic feeling that he was achieving something by categorizing the experiences he saw around him and learning more about the various categories to put there. But the whole reason he got into this is because he wanted to be with a beautiful girl, he wanted to be with a woman in his bed naked, and he had not achieved this, because the things that actually lead operationally to this happening is like actually much more chthonic and emotional. Him dealing with the fear of getting rejected, him feeling that sizzle of his adrenals dumping cortisol into his blood when he sees a gorgeous girl, and stepping forward, going up and speaking and making sure his voice doesn't waver too much, and then saying the right thing. And then, you know, this type of stuff, like these operational things just are completely pushed aside, and they're the things that actually count in the end. And so
that's fascinating. If I could just take a detour there for a second, your life experience sounds fairly similar to mine. Now, I'm in my mid 30s right now, and in my late teens, very, very early 20s, maybe like 19, I actually, in Toronto, one of the bigger cities around where we live, I got into the pickup artist scene. And I noticed the exact same thing you do, because I would go in basically because I'm like, I want to meet more girls. I want to get good at it. But that's what I want to do. So I'm going to go around these guys. And there were two different types of guys there. There's the one you were talking about, which is he studied all this stuff. And these are the guys who pay for the courses. They pay like $20,000 to go out with a guy with a fuzzy hat and learn all the words, and they collect all the words. And for me, the two things that I got out of the few gatherings, I never really paid for it, but I would go to these gatherings and go out with the guys, go to clubs and stuff like that. The two things I learned were what they said at the top. One is like, you're not going to meet a beautiful girl unless you make yourself attractive. And by attractive, they meant like, you can't be going out there with this shitty energy, this desperation, or this hatred. Like, if you're fat, get in shape. If you're pissed off at your life, fix your life first. Don't look for a girl that will fix your life, which is what a lot of them were there for. And then also, like, it's just go out and do it. Go now, go talk that girl over there, go talk to her, which is what I did. I started picking up girls in subways, in libraries, in the weird places. And I'm like, but that was me. And I noticed that not everyone there was like me, but they wanted to like learn all the stuff and be like the best guy who read all the books, while never actually talking to a girl, basically.
Yeah, look, man, that's 100% it. And I think when you have a life experience like that, it very intuitively falls into place. Like, you know exactly what I'm talking about, which is so funny, you know, because you've seen it, and you know yourself that even like it's so funny to think about, because Nietzsche's a philosopher and he's trying to talk to you about like how to live and how to live your experience. And it's like, imagine if your whole life was that guy who was stuck in his head, and you wake up at 70 years old and you look back and you wouldn't even realize what you missed out on. Whereas like a dude like yourself, like all those emotions where you're going up to the girl and you like, you come up with a corny line to talk about a book in the library or something like this, and then she kind of like looks you in the eye and she's like, oh fuck, this is awkward, and you actually manage to calm her down and pull it off, and she actually thinks you're cool and stuff. And it's just this absolute roller coaster of emotions, and it turns into this really, really beautiful thing. You might meet a girlfriend out of this, which is amazing. You know, like that's one of the most incredible experiences to go through. And it's really like something that, if you look at the modern world, look at how much you go online and you have all these theory cells who hate women and women who hate men. You see all these like women who are blaming men for everything and calling them rude things and stuff like this, and you see that there's an awful lot of death of love. Like there's no love, there's no passion, there's that kind of meat grind stuff of people and being involved in stuff. People maybe are having sex, but it's this very sterile, you know, Tinder dates and all these type of things, and it's not as emotionally rich, or the OnlyFans relationships and all this. And when you have this experience of like,
it's funny that you mentioned OnlyFans too.
yeah, like, because that's really like that, all these pathologies. I'm looking at this sort of like the experience of romance. I think is a really powerful one, and really raw, and really, you know, like just one of the apex experiences you can have. Just like the experience of bravery, like Edward Ludwig, whatever the fuck his name is, overthrowing a government. Like, think of the passions, the experiences he have. Like, think about his experience of politics compared to some dude who like reads an awful lot of Nietzsche or something like this, like myself. His experience of politics is like his heart literally beating out of his chest as he like bullshits a military general to let him to go into to let him basically take a SWAT team to the government building or something like this. And it's like, wow, man, that's an emotionally intense experience. That's fear, you know, that's doing it, and this type of thing. And that's really like Nietzsche's an existentialist formally, and not, he didn't want to describe himself this way because it wasn't really a word back then, but it's like engaging with the real world, affirming life, being in reality, engaging in the experience. And when you start to think about what that means, it's just so much richer and more vivid, and concepts just fall shallow. Like they're almost like guides. They're not like they're bad. They can help you model things out, and they're very useful for you to understand stuff. But when the rubber hits the road, it's about getting into the basics, and it's astounding the ways that this stuff can work. And again, just another slightly tangential example is the efficiency of something like, you know, you build a system. So say you build a business, and you have to work really, really hard on figuring out the operational efficiency in the supply chain. But then once that's figured out, this thing is like a gear. It just runs by itself, and it can completely set you free from the problem of finances. And that's actually a big deal. You know, like I had my business and my finances in order. So when the COVID came around, I was able to just say fuck you to any government that was just being a dickhead to me. And that's a very powerful position to be, because I had so much less fear than an awful lot of people. A lot of people I know had to compromise in their values, let's say, because of their jobs. But I was able to put I was a pain in the ass. I was a thorn in the foot of, you could say, the project, as best as I possibly could be. And that was because I'd spent my time making sure that I was free when it counted. And that's really something to think about. Like, what value is knowledge if it left you in that type of compromised situation? So it's really good thing to point out.
That's a fantastic way to summarize it as well. And first of all, I know it's pretty late where you are. Do you have time for maybe a couple more questions? Because I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, man, rock and roll. Like I've my sleeping patterns all over the place right now, so I can actually. Cool. I can dig into the late nights, late hours.
Because one thing I found fascinating about Nietzsche, and I got this from your videos because I'd never really heard this before, was, and some people don't give a shit about this stuff, but I do, which is Nietzsche the man, and his experience and his the impact he had at the time. Because you had made a point, I believe in one of your videos, where he wasn't really taken that seriously at the time. He wasn't the colossal figure, obviously, that we have right now. And you had talked about him developing this epistemological first principle. I was going to ask, was that rare? Like, was that a shock to the system at the time, as much as I think it is? And were people against him? And what was his experience proposing all this stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I guess the common trope against Nietzsche, which is somewhat true, is that he was a fucking incel loser who was not, like, you know, he was not the best with girls and stuff like this, and he did end up in some type of terrible situation with his health.
Well, he was good enough with girls to get syphilis, so at least he's got that going for him.
Yeah, he pulled that off. So he was definitely approaching girls on some level. But his life is, I think one of the most fundamental parts of his life is to understand his problem with health, because that was a big issue for him, is that he had like a really bad digestive system. He was like really struggled with migraines, and he did this very heroic overcoming of himself, because I think this is a big foundation for an awful lot of his quote unquote philosophy. He had this great, profound relationship to the understanding of how sickness affects mindset. So if you're sick, you obviously have slightly more negative thoughts. Now, that's not a trivial thing, because say if you are sick and you write a book of philosophy and that becomes the standard book that everybody reads in your culture, you're actually going to, by virtue, infect everyone in your culture with a sick philosophy that might make them do something absolutely terrible. And so he had a really good perception of how your thoughts can become damaged when you're feeling bad, because he felt bad his whole life, and he probably had his brain saying to him like, kill yourself and be depressed and give up on life, and life is terrible and life is evil and all this stuff. And his whole antagonistic spin to this was to turn around and basically say, first of all, I'm not going to give up on life. Second of all, I'm going to operationally change my health. That's what I'm going to fuck all theory. I'm going to focus on getting my health good. And so he goes and he starts to eat better, and he tries to figure out a diet. He actually ends basically on like a Paul Saladino carnivore MD diet, where he eats nothing but fruit and meat, which is very interesting in and of itself. And milk. Milk Chad. And
nice.
He goes and he puts this together, and his health gets better. And as a consequence, his moods get lighter and more powerful. And by the end of his life, or by the end of his sanity, he's basically writing stuff like, I'm actually starting to feel wonderful. I feel like finally in the sort of afternoon of my life, I'm having these big surges of vitality. And this is where he goes through his creative period. He writes all these creative big ideas and presents all this very interesting way of seeing things. And so he actually does overcome a situation in quite a dramatic way, and he in some sense lives out his philosophy in that way. Now he's definitely no Alexander the Great. That's absolutely true, but you can't rob his virtue from him either. Like, I actually think he really did something that all of us, I think, have to do. I'm very much the same. I grew up riddled with eczema, with asthma. I was a sickly autoimmune disease dude, getting fed like corn syrup and all this type of shit. And I had to overcome that through a project of searching for my health. And I remember looking over Nietzsche's life, and I think that was the thing that bonded me to him the most, is that he was that dude. Like, me and him went through that same experience. And the more I've spoken to people, like, everybody in the modern world seems to have some issue with this stuff, because they're poisoning us with the food, and the food is all shit and whatnot. And I think that's really a big deal. I really, really think that's a big deal. So he kind of overcame that situation. But he was also quite creative and poetic, and he was a college dropout in a weird way. Like, he drops out of the education system, and he drops out and writes his corpus of books, and he's getting them published, but nobody really is reading them. When he goes insane, people actually are starting to, even as he was finishing his decade of productivity, he was starting to get a readership. It was almost like he was publishing a blog, and towards the last 2 years, he was really starting to gain momentum, and then the fucking poor bastard ended up insane, so he couldn't really, really harvest it. Because basically 10 years after he went insane, even less, man, like 20 years after he went insane, World War I kicked off. Okay. So 20 years after he lost it, World War I kicks off. In World War I, the German people were carrying Thus Spoke Zarathustra in their knapsacks in the war beside the Bible. That's how fast that he took over their consciousness. Yeah. So he was a big deal, and I think his project was very fascinating, because he was talking about an awful lot of things that he wanted to do. I really think he wanted to engage in life. I think he wanted to, he was sort of like, he exited the university system. He was sort of creating these books to rally up a sort of intellectual elite. It's very similar to like BAP or something like this. BAP goes and makes Bronjade's Mindset and creates this network on Twitter. And Nietzsche was trying to do that in his own way. And I think he wanted to see something like it's very hard to describe, because he actually was talking about this like an institution. He wanted to create this sort of like trans-European institution, which was not overtly political, but sort of like a knowledge institution, almost like the church in a weird way, where or maybe like a peer review system or something like this, or like a modern media system. He was trying to think of like some thing that could be built with him and his friends, and they could use it to leverage and change European culture for the better, basically, is what he was saying. If you actually want an analogy of this, he was sort of talking like the idea idea of the World Economic Forum, like what that is. He was looking at building something like this from what I can read out of him. And now this is maybe him pontificating somewhat aimlessly, but I think that's what he was dreaming of. Is he'd rally his friends, they would get together, they would all agree on, okay, we want to see European values become more vital. It would take people a while to catch up with them. And when that was achieved, they could work then on setting up some type of institution in this type of way, maybe like some type of influence network or something like this, and then have this incredible leverage on the future of the world. And that obviously didn't come to fruition. And instead, he just became basically the prominent philosopher of the next century, beside probably Marx, I'd say.
Well, it's a fascinating life story, and I think in one of your videos you had kind of outlined he had a bit of a military history as well, if I'm not mistaken. But
he
he
did. I can get into that if you wish, or if you have other questions.
Well, I was going to talk just briefly about, because I found that so fascinating, his relationship, because he also had some. You had a video about like his relationship with trauma as well. And we were talking about trauma earlier, and I keep coming back to like how sickness itself can increase your fatalism, of course, but I think that might also grant you a different time horizon, because I had sort of a similar series of events in my life where, you know, I had this sort of lung infection when I was younger, and it kind of fucked up my breathing even to this day. And I had like a mini stroke like a year or two ago, and I was speaking to a friend of mine named the Prudentialist, and he was a young man, and he had a very life-threatening illness that he kind of goes into. And I'm like, I think people who have that experience that jolts you into thinking that, oh my God, my life could end. Because when you're in your 20s, you feel invincible. But if you know that the clock is ticking, the sensation of being a young man but knowing the clock is ticking, I think changes your mind and makes your ambition just go into overdrive. And what do you think about that?
Maybe yes, I think the broader understanding of Nietzsche's relationship to sickness is it's almost like the end of Train Spotting. You know, it's like choose life, choose the fucking whatever it is. He kind of has that experience from what I see, is that he's a sickly boy. You know, he's a sickly guy, and he finds a variety of reasons for this. He blames German culture quite a lot. He blames you know, maybe his own lack of inner vitality or something like this. He was somewhat of a healthy dude, but he ends up in this bad spot. And this negative, like, it's almost like he gets visited by pessimism, the specter of pessimism that tells him to give up on life. And it's like he's sick. I think, you know, he probably dealt with the suicidal thoughts. He's sick. He's constantly sick. He's got this issue. He can't think. He's going blind. He was blind at one point. And it's like, why not just slit your wrists or something like this, you know, or get a gun and blow your brains out? Like, what's the point in going on with this? And these negative, jaded thoughts probably overtake him. And he conquers this at one point. He overcomes this, and he chooses life. He decides, I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to figure out a way. And so he takes it very seriously, trying to figure out how to match his metabolism to like the environment. And he goes to like the Alps and stuff like this. And he becomes a mountain boyo and all this type of stuff. And I think that act gets him to do this life affirmation thing that he's always banging on about, which is a really big deal, because the foundation of his philosophy is like, all right, the thing he looks at Buddhism, he looks at Christianity, he looks at Schopenhauer, he looks at pessimism, he would look at modern liberalism, and he sees inside of it this fundamental philosophical denial with life, this weariness with life. It's almost like a spiritual suicide. Buddhism is like, the world is not real, it's Maya, it's samsara, we must escape to samsara, to nirvana. The Christians are like, this entire reality is not the real reality, God's reality is up in heaven, we're literally waiting here until we get brought up to there at the end of times. Schopenhauer has the same philosophy, as like, reality is an evil samsara, and the only righteous thing for you to do is to basically use yourself orgasmically like an artist and destroy yourself in this like artistic suicide or something like this. Whatever is going on, he notices this weariness inside all these ways of thinking that don't empower him, that don't stimulate him to take on the world and fight. And he has to find that energy in order for him to live, in order for him to not take his own life or to give up. And in order for him to act and make these, because when you're sick, the day after you're better is the hardest day of your life, because that's the day you have to take the first step out of bed and you're weak. I broke my arm last year, and this is exactly what it was like rehabbing yourself to be able to pick up a cup is not exactly romantic, but that's where you actually learn what you're made of. That's where you learn how much you want it, that type of thing. And so I think that was really the experience that he had that was such a big deal, is that he decided that he was going to do the basic operations. He was going to focus on eating fruit and meat and see what worked with his digestion. He was going to focus on his climate. He got into hiking and stuff like this. And he's like, this is going to lay the foundation for my health.
Yeah, and that was what was so fascinating. And another thing I learned from one of your videos, which, just to build on what you're saying, was Nietzsche was adverse to coming up with any ideas inside, and would continuously thrust himself into these long day-long walks where he would do all of his thinking and conceptualizing, but he refused to do any of that inside. He had to be out with nature, with the, like you were just saying, in the real world, in the present, around life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. And the kind of life he chose to live is a very fascinating one, because he was trying his best to live like some type of active hero. Because it's very interesting, like at the end of the 19th century, we were beginning to trend into this intellectual experience. And he was trying his best to resist this. And so what did he do? He spent all day walking out in the mountains. He actually took inspiration from this from like Napoleon and Julius Caesar, where they would go on long marches with their army. And he was, what was the old classical army life? Is like, it's actually just a lot of walking, a lot of marching. That's really what it was. And then every now and again you're going in this big fight. And so Nietzsche was in some sense simulating this. And so, yeah, he was doing all this, and he learned the vitality of thought when you're out moving and getting your blood flowing. And he became a very embodied thinker. I think the only thing that he never really figured out, which I do think probably like grated on him an awful lot, was loneliness. I think that was one thing that the poor bastard probably struggled with. And that would be very hard, because he's like one of those like autistic, super intelligent dudes. And he's, probably struggled to relate to people an awful lot. And he had all these blisteringly inventive, creative ideas. And I think that's one thing that he wasn't marching with his boys, he was marching by himself. And that was the great struggle. But sometimes people have to make those type of sacrifices for the future of the world, I guess.
Well, you know what? He's not as bad as Schopenhauer. He seems to have been a bit more popular than, from what I've read about Schopenhauer and his thoughts on, how to get women. Didn't seem to be going very well for him.
Well, see, Schopenhauer is an absolute Chad. Like, Schopenhauer pulled loads of girls. Schopenhauer did really well. He was really social. Schopenhauer's hilarious, because Schopenhauer is not a representation of his own ideas. Nietzsche often talks about this. And in fact, Schopenhauer had a lot of followers who committed suicide because they actually took Schopenhauer seriously. Where Schopenhauer had this almost intellectual pessimism. But the way he lived was nothing like this. Like Nietzsche said, or maybe it was someone else, but somebody said that Schopenhauer disproved his own philosophy because after dinner every day he played the flute. It's like,
this is so counter to everything I've heard, because we've read Schopenhauer. We covered The World as Will and Representation on the show, but I didn't really go into his life. But the meme going around right now is that Schopenhauer was the original incel, and you're saying that's way off.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he was smashing girls. I remember even late into his age, I think he was smashing girls. I don't think he was an incel at all. Like, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain that he was out there. He was running game on girls. Like, he was out there doing this stuff. The big thing about Schopenhauer is that he was not like, Nietzsche. People say he was not a representation of the Übermensch. So that's Nietzsche invalidated. Weirdly, Schopenhauer was not a representation of a pessimist. He was like a jolly, happy-go-lucky dude who engaged with life. He ate dinner in a restaurant. He hung out with people. He was a bit of he liked to be alone and all this, but he knew people. He had a social network. Like, Nietzsche was nothing like this. Nietzsche was sort of like a troubled, lonely, sort of schizo artist that was running around the mountains, and it really kind of captures the vitality of his thought, because his thought is just so bizarre and broad. It's got that feeling of like a kind of spurgy, out of touch dude who lives in the fucking mountain. Like, it really just has that feel. Where Schopenhauer there's this incongruence with the two of them.
But let me ask you this, and this will be a very, very stupid question, so bear with me. But we spoke previously about the slave versus master worldview. Is the master synonymous with the Übermensch, or are these two different concepts?
Yeah, so I would say they're different concepts. It's a common misunderstanding. It's quite a complicated thing, but to put it very, very simply, Nietzsche's with the Übermensch is trying to think about he's trying to think about like a eugenic project, if you want to think about it this way. Now, I know that's a dirty word, but we mean it like
Not around here.
we mean it like every choice you make leads to a result. There's a cause and effect relationship with everything. And a culture is a group of people making a collective set of choices habitually, you know? And so every choice in a culture leads to a consequence. This is quite abstract. I'm going to bring it down to the tangible now in a second. So a certain culture is going to produce a certain type of person. So, for example, in American or Western culture right now, there's all these minute operational details, like we were discussing earlier, all these tiny little things that are very easy to overlook. So, for example, there's this business guy who realized that genetically modified crops are going to get him some government funding. So he chooses to make those. He genetically modifies corn. This corn then gets digested and turned in a giant factory into corn syrup, which ends up in quite a lot of foods, which causes a mild amount of inflammation, which makes the general American population slightly more unhappy. This happens in 40 to 100 to 1,000 different ways with a variety of different food products, making the American people like slightly overweight or slightly less healthy. I mean, their health bills go up and stuff like this. They're more cranky all the time. Their intelligence is a little bit stunted. They could be so much more intelligent than they are. They're very genius people, but they get stunted by all these like little tiny tweaks and decisions that happen around the food supply system. Flip that with the education system, social media. Like if you went into any of these fields, there is a miasma, an incomprehensible amount of little details that that are built on all these small cultural decisions and habits that lead to very, very big results. And it's almost impossible to really understand how to make them all fit together. But even with the food one, like think of the monumental size of the consequences from the food one. You get the next generation of people are more overweight. The parents' sperm is like the dad's sperm is less effective. Maybe the kids are less healthy. The kids are more frail. The kids are less intelligent, all these types of things. Now, what is happening basically is that over the generations, this trend continues. And you're going to have a batch of kids, a generation of kids that are like so significantly less than their forefathers that you could nearly consider them like a sort of fallen race or a fallen version of them or something like this. You know, they're like a load of golems that were produced out of the American pioneers that charged across the forested basically Superman to charge across this.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to think of an antagonistic or a different direction that would go, imagine if you created a culture that tackled all of these nuances. And like, again, this is so incomprehensibly large, but that's the level, the depth, the rigor that this would need to take. A culture, a people that had a culture that meant that, you know, when the kid grew up, all the food he ate made him like be full of vitamin K2. So his jaw was chiseled. He became tall. His bones became broad. He had much superior muscle mass. His testosterone was higher. His mind was clearer. He was healthier. He did all these type of things. He was more intelligent. He went to an education system that maximized his potential from day fucking one. He became a magnificent problem solver. He became athletically skilled. He became musically skilled. His right hemisphere and left hemisphere were cross-wired because of all this musical training and whatnot. He became a very good speaker. He developed all this competency for these types of things. And it's like, think of the specimen that character would be. He became like educated in history and literature. Think of the specimen that character would be compared to the modern American, or the modern Westerner. Like, I don't mean to be jading on Americans too much. Right. Now, follow that same operational principle of like, what would happen if the generation of that Chad continued forward? What would happen? The next generation would be even taller and bigger and stronger and smarter and better, and continue that process down for a couple of generations. Now, make these two things run parallel to each other. What will you basically have? You will have one guy who's essentially going to be a different entity, a different species, combining this with like all this technology, like, you know, CRISPR and IQ stuff and biohacking and augmentation and all this. Maybe you think that's all stupid and gay and all this type of stuff, but whatever. Like, just let's use our imagination a little bit here and get a bit sci-fi. This character, this culture focused on excellence versus this culture mistakenly focusing on comfort and pleasure instead of health. these two people are going to be different species, nearly different races, different entities. They're going to be like, one of them is going to live for 170 to 180 years. The other one's going to live for 60. One of them might have an IQ relatively of like 200 compared to the other guy who's like, a grug brain and all this type of stuff. Like that's the evolution of man into different races, as I said, different species. It's like Lord of the Rings returning once again. And this is I think the best way to ground the idea of what the Übermensch is that basically saying, if we got organized on that project and made sure that the direction we were going was obviously the more ideal one here, where would that take us? What would we have to do in order to achieve that? And that's basically all the Übermensch is, as far as I can understand, is like a goal. Is to sort of say, all right, let's put us on that path operationally. What do we have to do to try reach towards the Übermensch? And you'll realize that it's such a bizarre, ever blossoming problem. Like, there's so many things you have to get correct. You have to set up a culture. A culture is a million things happening all at once that you need, hundreds of competent men in high positions of authority getting correct all the time. Nobody's slacking. That's what a culture is. It's the greatest achievement of all time when it goes right. This is why Nietzsche loved high cultures like Greece and France and stuff like this.
It's fascinating because the culture does inform the biology on a long enough timeline, and people seem to always forget that and almost believe this fantasy that it's just magic or something. People end up this way, but no, like, and so many times when eugenics is brought up, people will just stop it at race or ethnicity. But once you broaden the scope, it really is everything, because institutionally reinforcing behavior will have genetic permanence on a long enough timeline.
Yeah, and there's also another concept. Like, obviously, the mob is not very good at nuance, but evolution is not a binary. Like, evolution is always active, and it's not going up or down. It's not going good or bad. It's just active. We're always evolving. There's always cause and effect happening, and so choosing to eat McDonald's is a eugenic or dysgenic choice. Choosing to allow government policy to instantiate corn syrup is choosing profit, or short-term profit over a different goal. It's choosing something. This is again where Nietzsche gets criticisms of being a moral relativist. It's like Nietzsche just understood with nuance what morality actually is. Morality is decision making, and decision making cannot be abstracted into some objective thing. Like, decision making is about understanding the incredible broad array of nuances and understanding the goal that you should be aiming at with the decisions that you make. And so if you're aiming for something like the Ubermensch and you go into the agricultural system, all of your decisions are going to be so much better informed than some guy who goes in with the idea of profit. He's going to do much different things, and his things are going to sacrifice the ideal of the Ubermensch, of healthier people. And likewise, if you're going to do it for comfort or pleasure, whatever it is, these things have all these very complicated relationships. And so Nietzsche, in his genius, is able to penetrate through all this schema and understand the goal is what dictates morality. The goal is what dictates decision making. That's how you control for good morals. That's how you make people make right choices, is give them a vision of what they're actually aiming to achieve. That's how you pull it off. And so the Ubermensch is this idea of, like, we're in this modern world. We should be aiming to see ourselves transform into this. Like, this is the whole meaning of our culture comes down to this, because if we don't change this stuff, if we don't manage to seize all these institutions and this is culture in a personal sense. It's not just like, this is sort of like the libertarians say this side correctly. They leave out all the other stuff, but they are actually right about this, is that it's like our personal responsibility about how we train ourselves to speak, how we deal with our friends, how we deal with, like, even things like how we eat and how we dress. These are all cultural realities. And we have to get fully wrapped up and serious with these. Nietzsche has a beautiful phrase on this where he says, it's in Twilight of the Idols, I think, on beauty. Beauty is incredibly costly. Anything ideal is incredibly costly. People, in order to become beautiful, like, for example, in 17th century France, people have to hold themselves to a standard, even when there's nobody looking. You have to dress your best to just walk around your fucking house type thing. And this is a big deal because this is hard to do. And this is a sort of like personal penetrative culture. And all of these things need to be in the right place if you want to see people win. And this is just the problem, is that we live in a combination of the worst. We have a general malaise of low standards, married to institutional low standards. And that's the thing that we're really trying to aim and change.
That's a great sequence of points you just made there. And I'm going to summarize it into one question I'm going to put to you. And maybe this will be the last question because I do need to get going soon. My wife is looking around the corner because she wants to make dinner. I'm a few hours behind you. But based on, you mentioned a few things there. One, and we kind of started with like transhumanism and tech and stuff. And the question kind of emerged in my mind is transhumanism and perhaps even artificial intelligence kind of a cheat? And is it almost counter to this idea of the Übermensch, where something needs to be generated from within, and all this technology stuff would be a shortcut that might be antithetical to that? What do you think about that?
So Nietzsche's thoughts on technology are not as developed because in the 19th century, the experience of technology was much more like it wasn't actually as relevant back then. Like it wasn't as big of a meme back then. You'll actually notice his proteges like Oswald Spengler talks about technology, and Heidegger, they talk about technology a fuckload because technology almost 30-40 years after him just started to kick into serious gear. So they have like Man and Techne and stuff like this, and they talk about it a big time. Nietzsche lived in a much more mechanical Newtonian age. That was sort of his age of a 19th century science and whatnot. So he talks about like force, and he talks about slightly different first principles. So he has no real guiding comments on how he expects that stuff to work. But my take, I don't think like how any of this stuff should be redundant, or antagonistic. The Ubermensch, whatever type of goal it is, technology is fundamentally a part of human culture. In fact, it's very much like an intrinsic part of human culture. So we use it, we use it. And I think actually this is probably the most important thing, is that technology guided by an ideal is so much more compelling than the way that we use technology now. Because technology right now is sort of, we allow ourselves to let technology be guided by the sort of American standard ideals of profit and big capital and stuff like this. I sound sort of like a fucking commie here, but it's a big issue, because then you have like, what is technology used for? It's like these social media platforms that are just designed to get everybody onboarded and addicted to dopamine and all this. And it's like, where's the higher goal? Where's the educational principle in these type of things? We're sorely lacking in an ideal first principle, a vision to guide us in how we make decisions about how to arrange these things. Instead, stuff like the state is kind of cooked and steps out of the way and lets Zuckerberg build whatever platform he wants, as long as it follows their sort of constitutional rules. And for this reason, it can be very, very pernicious to society, and people can't quite use it. And so this is going to be a continual problem with like AI and stuff like this. Like, look at how AI so quickly got co-opted by the values of the libtard regime. They begin to censor ChatGPT, and you can clearly see that technology is fundamentally related to the value system that it is born within. It will serve that in some sense. And the premier thing is having the values straight so that technology can have an intelligent purpose. Technology is very much like a neutral tool. It's like the old argument of like, guns don't kill people, I do. It's like, all right, well, we got to figure out making how to get into the minds of the person wielding the tool, and then that will justify the tool.
That's a great response to that question. I know it's kind of a strange question, and I think over the course of our discussion, I can say probably the best compliment I could say to a guest, which is you helped recontextualize a lot of things that I was thinking about. You brought into sharp focus some things that were kind of foggy for me. And I think this has been a fantastic talk. I just wanted to say that in so many words. And I think there's a lot of people who probably kind of snapped out of some, I don't want to use the word toxic. What's a good one? A tombish way of thinking, listening to this. And I think that a lot of people are going to like what they heard here today. If you had any closing thoughts, I wanted to pass this to you before I also remind people where they can find you. Are there any closing ideas you didn't get to cover?
Sweet. Oh, there's loads of things I'd love to talk about.
I could have you back on 5 more times, because I know we didn't get even to most of the stuff I wanted to talk about. We just kind of went off, but this has been very good.
I was going to say, I know you're in a bit of a rush, so if you can't do it, it's fine. But you said you had some audience questions. If there's any of those, I'd happily answer those. If you don't have time, it's absolutely fine.
I got to most of the audience questions, actually, because they had a lot based on the videos about we got to most of them over the course of it about Nietzsche's life and how stuff like that. So we incidentally got to most of them.
Beautiful. All right, fantastic. Well, there you go. That's the I's and the T's crossed. But look, I wouldn't say too much more because obviously this stuff is getting in the weeds. I would really like with what I'm doing with social media to try my best to make these ideas as punchy and as clear as possible because Nietzsche is a very difficult reader to he's very difficult to understand. He speaks with an awful lot of like philosophical context that a lot of people don't have. So I really like trying to digest the stuff and make it relevant to us because I do think that where the West is right now, we're having a crisis of culture. People call it a crisis of nihilism, but I think it's even more annoying and pragmatic. It's a crisis of culture. We don't know how to get a grip of the operational things we need to do in order to, set these habits in the right direction. And we are also facing a very big existential problem, which I mentioned earlier. And Nietzsche covers both of these. The first one is, for example, the guilt that haggards us about the trauma of the colonial projects. And me being Irish, weirdly, I'm caught up with that, even though I was a colony. And this guilt and the resentment we're getting from the rest of the world as a consequence of this is something that Western people need to spiritually overcome. They need to, like, Nietzsche has the answer to that. And that, I think, might be the most important thing, because that is allowing them to overcome that and go back to a position of creativity and stop themselves from being haggard and depressed and strangled. That's a big deal. I really think it's a big deal. And then the second one is understanding that Übermensch project, more specifically, that kind of idea of like cultural idealism. I think that's a really, really important thing that a lot of people, like, that when the rubber hits the road, that's what's going to count fundamentally. And it's very, very hard to do that. That's a very big task, but that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. Like, a lot of people are waiting for a political leader, and I think a political leader is going to be important at some point, maybe many of them. But we also do need like a broad array of 1,000 effective men punching at every single one of these corners all at once, because that's the type of thing that will just be overwhelming. Like, no regime will be able to deal with something like this. And I'm not even talking about some like political regime, but like a cultural paradigm will just get dissolved by 1,000 men. Some dudes focused on the health sphere, some dudes focused on education, some dudes focused on philosophy, some dudes focused on politics, some dudes focused on art. This type of like all penetrating focus on cultural excellence in every square inch of Western culture, that's going to be the winning play. That's fundamentally what's going to make things like super comprehensive. So they be the two maybe things I can draw a double note underneath.
That was a chef's kiss way to tie everything together. Thank you for saying that. I know a lot of people are going to be energized by that. And if people want to hear more, I want to redirect them to Uberboyo.com and look him up. He's on YouTube. He's on Instagram. He's on Twitter. He's on Odyssey. You can find all of his videos. If you liked what you heard, you can find all kinds of stuff there. And also the intersections with Nietzsche and Jung, which we can probably get to at some point in the future. Check him out. Lots of content. I think like every day you got something else going up, some short or something. But
let's go.
Everyone check that out. And once again, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down with me today.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, my man. Thank you for the questions. Thank you in earnest for pursuing this. I know we had a little bit of trouble with comms and all this stuff. And I'll just say, if any of the boyos are listening, because we may share this at some point, if any of the boyos, you are listening, my dear boyos, give this gentleman a follow. He had a bit of a banning on Twitter and all this type of stuff. Nothing crazy, just the annoying stuff that goes on.
I'm just a reply guy. That's my thing. I just like being weird to people, which is what you're not supposed to do, really.
So this is it. So replied guy to some blue check, and he got nuked. So give him a follow. He's obviously like running this project, and we have a lot of guys out here that are trying to earnestly to get the culture in a good place, and so you support them the best you can. So as I'm saying, boyos, give them a subscribe, drop them a comment, like, all these type of things, depending on where this stuff is up. Thank you very much, sir, for your time, and for all the people who put in the questions. Thank you very much as well.
All right, thank you very much.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.